When the studio lights went dark that October night, nobody in that audience of 300 people knew they were about to witness a secret that had been buried for 22 years. A secret so carefully guarded that even Johnny Carson himself had no idea it existed, until the moment Rock Hudson leaned across that desk and whispered 4 words that made Doris Day's coffee cup shatter on the floor. What happened in the next 11 minutes would never be spoken of again by anyone in that studio, and yet somehow, it would end up changing the way America understood 2 of its most beloved stars forever. But before we dive into what really happened backstage that night, I want to say something important. I see comments all the time from people who did not realize they were not subscribed to this channel. If you enjoy these stories, please take a second right now to check whether you are actually subscribed. It costs nothing. It takes 5 seconds, and it is the only thing that keeps stories like this one alive and reaching people who need to hear them. Thank you for being part of this with us. Now, let's go back to where it all began, because what you are about to hear was never supposed to be told. October the 14th, 1976. BC Studios, Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was taping at 5:30 in the afternoon for broadcast later that night, and nobody on the crew expected anything unusual. Rock Hudson had been booked for a routine interview to promote a new television project. Doris Day was a surprise addition, added to the lineup only 48 hours earlier at Hudson's own request, a request that came through his agent with unusual urgency and almost no explanation. The producers thought it was simply good television, a reunion of 2 old friends, 2 faces America had loved since the 1950s, sitting together on the same couch for the first time in years. Nobody knew that Rock Hudson had spent the entire week before that taping unable to sleep. Nobody knew that he had rewritten a letter 4 times, only to burn it each time in the sink of his Beverly Hills home. Nobody knew that the reason he requested Doris Day specifically was because he had finally decided, after 22 years, that he was going to tell her the truth in front of the entire country, because he did not trust himself to say it any other way. But something happened backstage 40 minutes before the cameras rolled that almost stopped everything. Rock Hudson arrived at the studio at 4:45 in the afternoon, nearly an hour early. His assistant later said he looked pale, distracted, his hands trembling slightly as he signed in at the security desk. He asked twice whether Miss Day had arrived yet. When he learned she had not, he retreated to his dressing room and did not come out. The makeup artist assigned to him that day, a woman named Carol Ann Whitfield, who had worked on the show for 9 years, later said she had never seen Rock Hudson like that before. Quiet, almost frightened, staring at his own reflection like he was trying to find the courage to look himself in the eye. She asked him if he was feeling all right. He told her he was about to do something he should have done in 1954. She did not understand what he meant. Nobody did, not yet. To understand what was about to happen on that stage, you have to go back more than 2 decades, to a night in 1954 that neither Rock Hudson nor Doris Day had ever spoken about publicly. Not once, in 22 years. Rock Hudson was 29 years old in 1954, and by every external measure, his career was exploding. Universal Studios had built him into one of the most bankable leading men in Hollywood. Magazine covers, adoring fan mail by the thousands, a face that seemed built for the silver screen. But behind the studio-manufactured image, Rock Hudson was carrying a weight that could destroy everything he had built in a single afternoon if the wrong person discovered it. The studio system in 1954 did not tolerate anything that threatened the image it had constructed, and there were men inside Universal's front office, men with real power, who had grown suspicious. A private investigator had been quietly hired. Rumors had reached a gossip columnist known for ending careers with a single paragraph. Rock Hudson was told in no uncertain terms that if the story broke before the studio could control it, his contract would be terminated within the week, and every studio in town would be informed why. He was 29 years old, and he was about to lose everything he had built, not because of anything he had done wrong on a set or in a performance, but because of who he was forced to hide every single day of his life. He confided in almost no one. The private investigator, hired quietly through a chain of intermediaries so that no single name could ever be traced back to the studio itself, had already compiled a file thick enough to end more than one career, not just his own. The gossip columnist circling the story was known throughout the industry for a simple rule. She never printed anything she could not prove twice over. And by late September of 1954, she was reportedly one confirmed source away from running the item. Rock Hudson knew this because a friend inside the publicity department had warned him, quietly, over a payphone 3 blocks from the studio because he did not trust the lines on the lot itself. He remembered standing in that phone booth, the receiver shaking slightly in his hand, thinking that everything he had built since he arrived in Los Angeles, with almost nothing to his name, no connections, no money, no family in the industry to protect him, was now measured in days, maybe weeks, before it all came apart in a single newspaper column. But there was one person on the Universal lot who noticed something was wrong before anyone else did. Doris Day had co-starred with Rock Hudson only once before that year, but the two had become close during production. Close in a way that surprised people, who assumed their warmth on camera was simply professional chemistry. Doris noticed that Rock had stopped eating lunch in the commissary. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes that makeup could not fully hide. She noticed that he flinched every time a studio executive walked past him on the lot. One afternoon in late September of 1954, she found him sitting alone in an empty soundstage after everyone else had gone home, and she asked him directly what was wrong. What happened in the next 3 hours would remain a secret between them for 22 years. Rock Hudson told her everything. He told her about the private investigator. He told her about the gossip columnist circling closer every week. He told her, for the first time out loud to another living person, the truth about who he really was, the truth he had spent his entire career hiding beneath a studio-built image of the perfect leading man. He expected her to be shocked. He expected her to walk away and never speak to him again, because that was what everyone in this town did when the truth got too dangerous to be near. But wait, do not miss what happened next, because it changed both of their lives forever. Doris Day did not walk away. She sat with him in that empty soundstage until nearly midnight. And when he finished talking, shaking, certain his career was over, she told him something he never forgot. She told him that whatever happened, whatever the studio decided, whatever the columnists printed, she was not going anywhere. And then she did something that put her own career and reputation directly at risk. She went the very next morning to a friend she trusted inside the studio's publicity department. And without revealing the true reason, she began quietly steering attention away from Rock Hudson and toward manufactured stories she herself helped construct. Stories about his supposed romances with actresses. Stories that gave the columnists something else to chase. Something that kept them from ever finding what the private investigator was circling. For months, Doris Day spent her own social capital, her own carefully built reputation, protecting a secret that was not hers to protect, asking nothing in return, telling no one, not even her own family. She began appearing at events with Rock Hudson on her arm, allowing photographers to capture exactly the kind of image the columnists were hungry for, a budding romance between two of the studio's biggest stars, feeding the very rumor mill that might otherwise have turned its attention toward the truth. She did this for nearly 4 months, through the autumn and into the winter of 1954, attending premieres, dinners, and industry functions specifically engineered to keep the wrong kind of attention pointed in the wrong direction. Rock Hudson later said that watching her do this, watching her absorb the speculation and the whispered judgments of a town that loved nothing more than deciding who a woman was based on who she was seen with, was the single most humbling thing he had ever witnessed another person do on his behalf. What you have seen so far is nothing compared to what she actually gave up to do it. There was a man, a studio executive with real influence over which pictures got greenlit, who had begun courting Doris Day's favor that same autumn, hoping to attach her to his own projects. Doris understood that if she distanced herself from that executive, as she needed to in order to protect the fabricated stories she was building around Rock, she would lose access to 3 separate roles that had already been informally promised to her. She let all 3 go. She never told anyone why, Not even the friends who tried to talk her out of it. Not even decades later when journalists asked her directly why those projects had fallen through. She simply said she had changed her mind about the material. Her agent at the time reportedly argued with her for nearly an hour over the decision, certain she was making a catastrophic professional mistake. And Doris never once explained her reasoning. Not to him, not to her own manager, not to anyone. She carried that silence for 22 years, and Rock Hudson carried the weight of what she had sacrificed for him for exactly as long, unable to find the words, unable to find the moment, unable to bring himself to say thank you for something so enormous that thank you felt insulting. Every year around the same week in autumn, he later admitted, he would sit down and try to write her a letter, and every year he would tear it up before it was finished, convinced that no combination of words could possibly be worth what she had given up. But there was something else eating at him too, something he had never said to anyone, not even to Doris herself, a quiet fear that if he ever did say it out loud, if he ever did make her sacrifice visible in front of the world, it might cost her something all over again, 22 years later, in a town that had not changed nearly as much as either of them wanted to believe. Until October the 14th, 1976. Back in the present, in the green room of The Tonight Show, Rock Hudson sat alone with a folded piece of paper in his jacket pocket, a paper he had carried with him for 3 days, rewritten 4 times and nearly thrown away twice. It was not a script. It was not notes for the interview. It was a letter he had written to Doris Day and never once had the courage to send. At 5:20, Doris Day arrived at the studio, and the moment she saw Rock Hudson standing near the stage entrance, something in his expression made her stop walking. She had known him for 22 years. She had seen him nervous before interviews, seen him exhausted after long shoots, but she had never seen him look like this, like a man standing at the edge of something he could not turn back from. She asked him quietly what was wrong. He told her only that he needed her to trust him tonight, whatever happened on that stage. She did not understand what he meant. But there was something in his eyes that told her not to ask again. Behind them, unnoticed by either of them in the moment, Fred de Cordova stood near the stage entrance watching the exchange with growing concern, later telling a colleague that he had seen nervous guests before, hundreds of them, but he had never once seen Rock Hudson look like a man standing at the edge of a decision he could not undo. He considered pulling Hudson aside privately before the taping began, asking directly whether something was wrong that the show needed to know about. He decided against it. It was a decision he would think about for years afterward, wondering what might have happened if he had simply asked one more question before the cameras started rolling. Wait, do not miss this detail, because it changes the way everything that followed should be understood. Rock Hudson had specifically requested, through his representative, that no one review his answers or discuss the format of the interview with him beforehand, an unusual request that the producers granted without much thought, assuming he simply wanted the conversation with Doris to feel natural and unrehearsed. What none of them realized was that he was not avoiding rehearsal because he wanted spontaneity. He was avoiding it because he knew that if anyone asked him directly what he intended to say, he might lose his nerve entirely. The taping began at 5:30 exactly. Johnny Carson opened with his usual monologue, sharp and unhurried, and the audience of 300 people laughed in all the right places, completely unaware that something extraordinary was building backstage, something that would unfold in front of them within the hour. During the first commercial break, Fred de Cordova, the show's longtime producer, pulled Johnny aside with an unusual request that had come directly from Hudson's representative. Rock Hudson wanted an extended, unscripted segment with Doris Day. No fixed questions, no predetermined structure, just the two of them talking. Johnny had learned over the years to trust his instincts about moments like this. He agreed immediately. Wait, do not miss this detail because it changes everything about what happened next. Johnny Carson had absolutely no idea what Rock Hudson was planning to say. Nobody did. Not the producers. Not Ed McMahon. Not even Doris Day herself. At 6:02, Ed McMahon's voice rolled across the studio, and Rock Hudson walked out from behind the curtain to thunderous applause. Tall, composed, that famous easy smile in place, betraying absolutely nothing of the storm underneath. He shook Johnny's hand, settled into the chair, and for the first 10 minutes the interview went exactly as everyone expected. Warm, funny, a little nostalgic, Rock talking about his new project with the practiced charm of a man who had spent 25 years perfecting exactly this kind of conversation. Then Doris Day was introduced, and the audience rose to their feet before she even reached the desk. An ovation that lasted nearly a full minute, because in 1976, seeing these two together again on the same stage felt like watching two pieces of American history reunite in real time. The two of them settled beside each other, and for a while the conversation drifted through familiar territory. The films they had made together, the industry as it used to be, warm laughter, easy nostalgia. But something shifted the moment Johnny asked an innocent question about what it had been like working together back in 1954. Rock Hudson's expression changed. The easy smile faded. His hands, resting on his knees, tightened slightly. And when he spoke, his voice had dropped into something quieter, something the studio microphones almost struggled to catch. "Actually, Johnny," he said, "there is something from that year I have never told anyone publicly. Something Doris did for me that I have been trying to find the courage to say out loud for 22 years. The studio audience, which had been laughing 30 seconds earlier, went completely silent. Doris Day turned toward him, and something in her face told everyone watching that she did not know what was coming either. But what happened next shocked everyone in that room, because Rock Hudson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded letter he had carried for 3 days. "In 1954, he said, his voice steady but thick with something the audience had never heard from him before, "I was 29 years old, and I was about to lose everything. Not because of a bad picture, not because of anything I did on a set, because of who I was, underneath the person the studio built for the cameras. And there was exactly one person in this industry who found out the truth and did not walk away." Doris Day's hand rose slowly to her mouth. The color drained from her face. "Rock," she said quietly, her voice barely audible even with the microphone. "Rock, please." He looked at her, and there were tears now, visible even under the studio lights. "I have to say this, Doris," he said. "I have carried it for 22 years, and I am done carrying it alone." He turned back to the camera, back to the 27 million people watching from their living rooms across the country, and he told them everything. He told them about the private investigator. He told them about the gossip columnist. He told them, without naming what exactly he had been hiding, that Doris Day had discovered a truth about him that could have ended his entire career in a single afternoon. And instead of walking away, instead of protecting herself the way anyone in this industry would have understood, she had spent months of her own reputation, sacrificed roles that had been promised to her, and told absolutely no one, for 22 years, simply to protect him. The audience had gone completely silent, the particular silence that falls over a room when something true and enormous is being said in public for the first time. "I found out later," Rock continued, his voice breaking now, "that you turned down 3 pictures that year. 3. Because staying close to me meant staying away from the one man who could have greenlit them. You never told me. I found out from someone else years later, and you never once brought it up, never once asked me to acknowledge it, never once made me feel like I owed you anything." Doris Day was crying now, openly, the tears cutting through her makeup under the hot studio lights. "I did not do it so you would owe me anything," she said quietly. "I did it because you were my friend and you were drowning, and I could not just stand there and watch." Rock Hudson unfolded the letter in his hands, the paper he had rewritten 4 times over 3 sleepless nights. "I wrote this because I did not trust myself to say it without breaking down completely," he said. "But I think I need to say it anyway." He read from the letter, his voice cracking on nearly every sentence, thanking her for 22 years of silence that had cost her more than she ever let him see, thanking her for a kind of loyalty he had never fully believed anyone was capable of, until she proved it to him in the darkest year of his life, telling her that everything good that had happened to him in the decades since, every role, every friendship, every quiet Sunday afternoon he had been allowed to actually live instead of just perform. All of it existed because she had chosen, at enormous personal cost, to protect a man the industry would have destroyed without a second thought. When he finished reading, he folded the letter carefully and set it down on the desk between them. "I should have given you this in 1954, he said. "I am giving it to you now because I am done being afraid of what it means to finally say thank you." Doris Day picked up the letter with both hands, the way you hold something simultaneously fragile and impossibly heavy. She read the final line silently to herself, and then she looked up at Rock Hudson, tears streaming freely now. "You never owed me a single word of this," she said, "but I am so glad you finally said it anyway." The two of them embraced, right there on the Tonight Show stage, in front of 300 people in the studio, and 27 million more watching from home. And for nearly a full minute, neither of them said anything at all. Ed McMahon had risen from his chair entirely. Johnny Carson sat perfectly still, visibly moved, allowing the moment to breathe without interruption, understanding instinctively that nothing he could say would improve what had just happened in front of his cameras. What you have seen so far is nothing compared to what happened after the cameras finally cut away, because the story did not end when the segment ended. NBC's switchboard was overwhelmed within 20 minutes of the broadcast airing later that night. Viewers called in not to ask what exactly Rock Hudson had been hiding in 1954, but to talk about their own version of Doris Day, the friend, the sibling, the quiet ally who had protected them during the worst chapter of their lives and never once asked for recognition. Newspapers the following morning ran the story on their front pages, careful, respectful, focused entirely on the theme of loyalty and sacrifice rather than speculation about what specifically had been at stake. Because in 1976, that was simply not a conversation America was ready to have directly. And both Rock and Doris understood that when they walked onto that stage. Fred DeCordova later said in an interview that he had produced The Tonight Show for years and had never once seen Johnny Carson allow a moment to run that long without attempting to redirect it. Johnny himself said, in a rare comment to a reporter weeks later, that some conversations do not need a host. They only need someone willing to get out of the way. He added that he had spent nearly 15 years learning exactly when to lean into a moment and when to rescue his guests from an uncomfortable silence. And that October evening was the only time in his career he could remember making a conscious decision to do neither, to simply sit still and let two old friends finish something that had been left unfinished for 22 years. Ed McMahon, for his part, told colleagues afterward that he had briefly considered stepping in with a joke, out of pure instinct, the way he had done 1,000 times before during the smallest lull in the show. He said something stopped him, some understanding that broke through even his practiced reflexes, telling him that whatever was happening in front of him mattered far more than the rhythm of the broadcast. Rock Hudson and Doris Day remained close for the rest of their lives after that broadcast. They spoke by telephone almost every week, something neither of them had done in the years before that October night. And friends of both stars later said the tone of those calls had changed entirely. No longer the careful, guarded warmth of two people protecting a shared history, but something looser, easier, the conversation of two people who finally had nothing left to hide from each other. Doris Day reportedly kept a small notepad by her telephone specifically for those calls, jotting down whatever Rock told her about his projects, his health, his day. Small details she said she wanted to remember precisely because for 22 years, she had trained herself never to ask him too many questions, never to get too close to whatever he might be protecting. Doris Day later said in a private conversation with a close friend, one that was only revealed publicly years afterward, that she had spent 22 years believing her silence in 1954 was simply the right thing to do, something so obvious it did not require acknowledgement. But watching Rock Hudson read that letter on national television, she said, was the first time she understood just how much that silence had actually meant to him, carried quietly year after year, until he finally found the courage to set it down. Rock Hudson passed away in 1985. Among the personal items found in his home afterward was a small wooden box he kept in his private study, not for public display, containing photographs, letters, and mementos that meant something to him privately rather than professionally. Inside that box, carefully preserved, was the folded letter Doris Day had handed back to him after that Tonight Show broadcast. The one he had written and rewritten 4 times, returned to him because, as she told him that night, some things belong to the person who wrote them, not the person who receives them. Doris Day lived for decades afterward, largely retreating from public life. But in the rare interviews she gave in her later years, she was occasionally asked about that October evening in 1976. She never revealed the specific truth Rock Hudson had been hiding in 1954, honoring, even after his death, the privacy she had protected for 22 years before that broadcast, and never once violated afterward. But she did say more than once that it remained one of the most meaningful nights of her entire career, not because of anything she had done, but because of what it revealed about what people are capable of carrying quietly for decades, simply because they love someone and do not need to be thanked for it. She also said something else, quieter, almost to herself in that same rare interview, that she had spent so many years assuming Rock had simply forgotten what she did for him, or worse, that he had never truly understood the cost of it at all. Watching him read that letter, watching his hands shake as he unfolded it in front of 27 million strangers, she said, was the moment she finally understood that he had never forgotten for a single day. He had simply been waiting all that time for the courage to say so. If this story moved you, I want you to think of the person in your own life who has protected you quietly, who has carried something heavy on your behalf without ever asking for recognition, without ever making sure you knew exactly what it cost them. Somewhere right now, there is someone who has been carrying something like that for you, maybe for years, maybe for decades, and they have never once brought it up because that is simply what love looks like when it does not need an audience. Find them, tell them you know, tell them thank you, even if it has been 22 years. Subscribe so you never miss these stories, because there are so many more moments like this one waiting to be told. Moments buried for decades behind the polished, practiced images we thought we already understood. Moments where the people we thought we knew turned out to be capable of something far deeper than the image the world built around them. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from, because these stories are reaching people everywhere, on every continent, in every time zone, and I want to know exactly where the truth is landing tonight. And if there is someone in your life who has quietly protected you without ever asking for thanks, someone who never once made you feel like you owed them anything for it, tell us about them in the comments below, right now, before you close this video. Let's remember them here together.